Hello, everybody out there in podcast land. This is the CX podcast, R&R, with me, Richard Knight.
And myself, Ryan Huxtable. Well, we've been away for a month, haven't we? We put out a bit of a classic last month, didn't we? With Verity Slater from Stephen Scone. Hope you all enjoyed re-listening to that or listening to that for the first time. But this month, we've got lots of exciting data, CX data to share with you, haven't we, Rich?
We have. This is episode 77, so this is data episode. UKCSI. Is that crime scene investigations or?
Well, on the results that I've seen, it ought to be customer service index. So yeah, we're going to share with you some data that's come out of the Institute of Customer Service that is freely downloadable on their site. So we're not sharing anything that you can't get on their site. But I want to just hone in on a couple of the things that we've picked up in that data, which really sort of reinforces all of the conversations we're having around being proactive with your customer listening and your customer experience measurement. So this survey, which happens twice a year, doesn't it? It happens in early in the year, January, and it happens again in July. So we're kind of midpoint. So this is the data that was published in February. And basically it covers 5 key things. The experience, the CSI measures the experience, the complaint handling, the customer ethos of organizations, the emotional connection of organizations with their customers, and the ethical reputation that customers, that the business has, and that is important to customers. So the data's out, and I'd like to say it was an improvement on.
Go on then, say it was an improvement. If you'd like to say that, Ryan, say it.
Yeah, but I will be lying.
Oh no,
we can't lie on this on our amazing podcast. So the upshot of it is that the UKCSI, the Customer Service Index, not crime scene investigation, measures something called a customer effort score. And for those of you who don't know, there are many different customer measurements, but customer effort score measures the effort the business goes to look after clients. So, for example, when you rang the business, did they answer the phone? That would be a customer effort measurement. Okay, so the overall score is 76% positive, but that obviously, for those mathematicians amongst you, will notice that's nearly a quarter of clients that felt that businesses didn't go the extra mile and didn't make that effort, and that's gone down over a year, 2.4 percentage points. So this time last year we had a score of knocking on the door of 80, but that is getting worse, and it is getting to be worse.
So in layman's terms, so I can get my very small brain around that sort of thing, basically prices are going up and customers are expected to put more effort in as well. So
yeah, well, it's a good point. Yeah, so prices have shot up. Therefore, you could argue that customers' expectations are higher, but in reality, the service experience they're getting is worse.
Yeah.
Now, there are 13 sectors that the UK Customer Service Index measures, and they are retail, non-food, tourism, banks and building societies, leisure, retail, food, automotive, insurance, telecommunications and media, public services, national services in general, which tends to be B2B, they measure transport, public services, local, and utilities. And the areas that have struggled the most in the last 12 months have been, probably not a huge surprise, but have been the utility sector, transport, and general services, along with insurance. So some interesting sectors. The transport one is definitely linked back to the industrial action for sure, and how that's been handled by companies. Utilities is an interesting one, but that is definitely driven by price in terms of what you're being charged. The B2B services one is an interesting one, and we believe that's down to the fact that it is increasingly difficult to try and get hold of service providers now. We talked about this before on this podcast, not having a telephone number to ring them on, pushing them through the AI route or a bot. And insurance is definitely price driven. We know that a lot of insurance premiums have shot up, and there's not a lot of real explanation for why that is. So, huge opportunity to improve that. But I want to share a really interesting statistic. Businesses that are scoring that 76% average score have an average growth of the companies that were surveyed of 4.1%. So 4.1% growth year on year. Now, if you layer over the effect of inflation, you could argue that's not really a defined growth, but we'll go with it. The EBITDA for those businesses was 13.7%. The operating margin was 5.6%. If you performed 1% ahead of that, so if you scored 77% in the survey, your compound growth was 7.4%. Your EBITDA was 20% and your operating profit was 11.3%. So you can see the impact of a better client experience is driving almost double the operating profit margin. Now, if you're 1% behind, which I'm sure the question you're going to ask me next, Rich, was the compound growth is flat, the EBITDA is 10%, and the operating margin is only 2.7%. So you can see the impact that having a great client experience brings to this conversation. And then the other thing I just want to share is the impact of poor service. And on average, although we know roughly a quarter of customers don't feel they're making an effort, 17% of those that were surveyed, of those customers surveyed, said that they had a complaint or an issue with that organization. Now, that equates to, in the average organization, individuals working in that organization spending 2.8 days of their month dealing with complaints and queries. And the Institute has calculated that for those businesses that were surveyed, we've got some really big businesses here, people like John Lewis, First Direct, Ocado, Nationwide. These are massive businesses, but it equates, it's cost those businesses 7.1 billion in costs to deal with those those queries and the impact it's had on the operating margin. So, if that wasn't a rallying call for getting client experience right, then I'm not sure what is. So higher profits, you have lower complaints, you make customers happier, and you'll drive growth. So what do you think to that then, Rich?
Well, I think this is not really a surprise, seeing as all the data that has been through the years says exactly the same. More profitability, less time spent on dealing with complaints. And we've spoken about these sort of these figures time and time again. And there are some organisations clearly who get it. So you mentioned Ocado and First Direct and John Lewis there. Who came out on top?
Yeah, great question. So the top organisation was Ocado, and they had they were up year on year. They were up 2.8% percentage points, and their position last year was 22. So they've rocketed into number one spot. First Direct were first last year. They're second this year at 85.3. They dropped 0.9. John Lewis was second last year. They're now third this year at 85.1. They dropped 0.5. Nationwide 84.8. They were at 28th. They're now fourth.
Okay.
Tesco Mobile have stayed pretty much where they were, fourth last year. And if you look at some of these new mobile providers, they're really focusing on the service experience and not tying people in, and actually leading with the great experience they give.
Yeah.
Costco was a bit of an outlier. Joint sixth was Jet2 Holidays. Costco was 30th last time and joint sixth this time, and Jet2 Holidays were 12th and they were joint sixth this time. Now, both of those organisations, Costco is very much it's very much led by good service but at great prices.
Yeah.
And Jet2 Holidays is the same. Really good service levels, but for the same price, if not less, than EasyJet or TUI or anybody else.
So amazingly, you can have an organisation or a business model that works at that less sort of not less quality, the lower costings, but still produce great customer experiences.
Yeah.
Interesting thought, isn't it? So when we got people who sat there listening to this going, yeah, but they've got lots of money to spend on all of this sort of stuff.
Mm.
Okay, it's all relative in terms of the amount of money they're going to be spending in terms of the size of the organization. If you can spend a small amount of your budget to actually look at improving, even if it's just how somebody answers a telephone, that could impact your score by that 1%, and then make a significant impact in the how profitable as an organization could be. So it's quite interesting, the way these organisations are still able to focus in on it.
For sure. And again, if you look at the rest of the top 10, you've got Timpson. If ever any of you have shopped in a Timpson, the owners of Timpson very much focus on service, and they employ ex ex inmates from the ex convicts, if you like. I don't use the word convicts. Ex inmates will use them, use that, and they really focus on giving them a fresh start in life, focusing on looking after the customer. And they were 60, they were 11th, and they've gone up to 8th. Holland and Barrett, again, are very much focused on, if you've seen their latest advertising campaign, they were 66th and now 9th. They're focusing on service in stores. They've trained people to give you advice on vitamins and supplements. And then closing off the top 10 is another bank, Sterling Bank. They have dropped slightly, but they're still in the top 10, 83.7. Interestingly, you've got First Direct, Nationwide, and Starling Bank. And interestingly, 2 of those don't have branches. But what they're very good at is the online experience. And Nationwide are taking a different view. They very much want to keep their branches open, but still provide a good online experience. So of the 287 organisations that the UK Customer Service Index measured, 17 have gone up, but 108 have gone down.
Ooh.
And dropped more than 2 points.
Quite interesting, just thinking about the different business models. And I mentioned, the Jet2 and stuff like that. But when you think about, you mentioned banks that haven't got face-to-face, when you think, well, customer experience, my God, someone that hasn't got a human being to interact with, but actually they're doing well. They're getting good feedback in terms of how they're operating. Whereas, you've got somebody more like the John Lewis side of things, and their model around, having partners, being part owners of the organization, and they're doing very well. So it's really interesting that if you're sitting there listening to this podcast and you think, well, my business is completely different to this, that's fine, because customer experience can be developed and put in place to actually reflect how your organization operates. It isn't a one size fits all, this is how you do it. There are different ways of measuring, which will give you measurements, but from a cultural point of view and a behaviors point of view, it's really, really important to understand who you are as an organization and what it is you want your customers, again, we've said this multiple times, what it is you want your customers to say, think, and feel about your organization. Because when you better understand that, you can fit in the processes, the behaviors, the expectations of your teams to what that outcome is that you're looking for, and then you get a better fit.
You're right, and I think the other thing that's quite interesting in all of this is if you look at the top 10. So there's a big debate, isn't there, in the CX industry at the moment around the last point I mentioned on what the UKCSI suggests you should bring into your organisation. And there's this fifth element around the social value that the organisation brings to the community, to its customers, to its employees, and so on. And interestingly, if you look at that top 10, there are 2 businesses there that are massively focused on social value. John Lewis being one of them. They're an employee-owned organisation, and Nationwide are a mutual. So they're very much owned by their members and take the cue from what their membership want, and they're very driven by the social value element of their business, and that is definitely playing through in both of those organizations in terms of how we have, one, the DNA of the organization and how it's made up, but secondly, the fact that they spend so much time engaging with their employees and customers is driving the right behaviors. Now, again, to your point, you might sit there and go, well, I'm not employee, and I'm not B Corp, I'm not mutual. It doesn't really matter. The broader point is you will have an element of social value in all of your businesses that you're out fundraising on a Sunday for your local charity, or whether you've got a carbon offsetting scheme that you're investing in. So the reality is, and I think this is a definite new phenomenon that is not new is probably too strong a word, but certainly a recent phenomenon where customers are waking up to the fact that they're not going to just choose a business based on price, based on how operationally efficient they are. What's important to customers now is the experience, but also backed up by what is the social value of the organization, and more importantly, how do you start to talk about that, and so that the client understands when they're making an informed choice about what you offer, where you sit in that regimen. So that was an interesting point that I think came out of this survey work as well.
And that fits in absolutely with the idea, the data that says that any purchase decision is based on emotion, 90% emotional decision making.
Yeah,
and that whole idea of you're doing good for my community, you're making a difference, not just making money, is a critical thing to get across to your customers, to your prospective customers, for people who aren't even thinking of coming to you, because they can share thoughts and understanding of what they're hearing about you, your organization. And it does make a big impact in terms of that decision-making process that the customers are going through. So there's some interesting data looking into that.
It's yeah, and so look, just to, in terms of final tips for to deliver
so what do the listeners do? How can they make a difference themselves?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Knight. I thought you rehearsed it. So 5 key things: prevent problems through positive improvement and complaint handling. Make it easy for customers to get hold of you. Make it easy. The second is not only to be able to get hold of you, but make it easy for them to access help and expertise. So you can give them a phone line that they ring in on, and they leave a query. If you don't go back to them and with the right expertise, then that causes dissatisfaction. Third thing is responding to customers' personal situational needs. So, not just sheep dipping all of your clients with the same issue, tying them with the same brush. They are all different. They all need different elements of help. Make sure you have a professional. The UK Customer Service Index coined this professionalizing customer service. And what that really means is, have you got a customer listening program in place? Do you measure? Do you understand what your customers are thinking? Because here's the thing. Customers have a view about what you do. It's whether you choose to listen or not is the important thing. If you choose not to listen, that feedback's still there. If you choose to listen, you give yourself the opportunity to react, to be able to do something about the feedback. And then finally, doing the right thing. So this social value piece, balancing business practice, the needs of the shareholder, the customer, the employee, and wider society is becoming increasingly important to how consumers and businesses are making purchasing decisions. So there it is, 5 top tips.
Wow. And that is, if you're listening to this podcast, that's just worth its weight in gold. You've got 5 top tips there, giving some nice summary insight into the UKCSI data. But we'd like to also give you another little bit of a freebie from us this month, because some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, I don't know where I am at the moment. I'm not 100% sure where our customer experience level is. So what we'd like to do is offer you the chance to complete a quick 4-minute survey of 12 questions, which will give you an idea about where you sit in terms of the CX or the customer experience zones. Is your organization within a risk zone in terms of customer experience, i.e. doesn't have anything to do with customer experience, doesn't measure anything in any way, and therefore has got a very high chance of losing customers? Are you in an awareness zone where your organization has almost seen the light, understands that you need to gather information, but hasn't got any formal processes in place? Are you in a breakthrough zone where you are actively considering how to improve the way your customers feel about your organization and implementing processes to ensure that can be done? Or are you the smaller percentage, the impact in the impact zone, where you have got the delivering exceptional customer experience is part of your identity. It is ingrained and it is everything you do, and your organization is built on the customer rather than the customer being that sort of last thought in terms of how you go about things. So there's 4 zones there. So if you'd like to understand where you are at the moment, and again, this also provides a report for you to give you a few top tips on how you can improve it, then please do scan the QR code that you'll be seeing on the screen now if you're watching on YouTube, or you can click on the link that will be in the podcast. It's a piece of software where you access this episode. So click on that, give it a go, and see where you sit, because there may be an opportunity for you to improve by that 1%. And we know it makes a big difference to the bottom line. And of course, your customers at the end of the day, which is the key thing. So
there we go. Lots to think about today. You may want to rewind it and listen to all those great facts again. Rewind, that's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it?
Rewind, hello, Grandad.
Back to the 80s and 90s.
You're going to get your biro pen and put it into your cassette player when the tape came out.
Oh, yeah, do you remember doing that? Yeah. That's when cider didn't used to come in tins, that it always used to come in bottles and kegs. Do you remember that?
Sorry for anybody who's younger than 50. Do apologise.
I'm younger than 50, just.
You don't get off, are you, flipping it. Right, anyway, we're going to go now. I've been Rich Knight.
And I've been Ryan Huxtable. See you next month.